because a lot of landlords are just trying to get away with as cheap of a materials and products as they can with the mindset that it's going to get destroyed anyways. And I feel like you're probably of a different mindset. I had a friend and mentor that used to say in the past, your biggest asset is not the rental property, it's the tenant. And if you take care of the tenant, they'll take care of your property. And I never forgot that. It is relationships with your tenants as well. Generations of Wealth podcast. I'm your host, Derek Dombeck, and today we are talking to Dave Holman, who hails from Maine. Dave's got a really interesting background, as most of our guests always do, but he's pretty passionate about property management and being a landlord, but in a way that I don't think a lot of people ever talk about. So, as always, before I bring on Dave, I want to thank you for being here. Thanks for following us and helping grow the show, sharing this wherever you can. And we're here to help you. So anything that we can do at the Generations of Wealth, feel free to reach out. Go to thegenerationsofwealth.com or derekdombeck.com. Contact me, contact us, and we'll do what we can to help you. So that's the intro for today. So let's just get on with the show and bring on our guest. And without any further ado, Mr. Dave Holman, welcome to the Generations of Wealth show. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me, Derek.
So I'd like to just start off with you telling everybody a little bit about yourself and your background. I know you're currently living in Maine, but from what I understand, you've traveled a little bit in your journey. So start us off.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I was born and raised in Maine, a little bit north of Portland, which is the one and only city that is sort of a real city, and even that would be a small town, in Texas or China. So I was in a middle class family. We didn't own any rental real estate or anything like that. Didn't think about that or business in general. Went to college and started learning about green building, architecture, climate change, things of that nature, and got inspired by it. But like most people, I spent the next 4 years in Bolivia starting a small retail chain camping store. I had met a young woman down there that we started dating, fell in love, and we're now married with two kids, two goats, a turkey, a duck, two chickens, the whole farm up here in Maine, except we get no profit from it. It's all just feeding different shapes of pet.
Yeah.
But I started really thinking about real estate while I was working in nonprofit fundraising, and development. And we got pregnant with our first child. And I thought, man, I'm paying the bills and getting by, but this is not gonna cut it, for when we are trying to raise a child and have an abundant lifestyle. So admittedly, it was a bit selfish, but I was like, ew, landlords. Like to me, that was like a dirty word back then. And it then suddenly occurred to me as like, wait a minute, I could convert a house from an oil burning furnace to high efficient electric heat pumps, and the tenant would pay me to do it, and I would make money in the house over time, and I would actually make more money because then they're paying the heat, an electric bill instead of me paying a central heating system, and I can use leverage. And I started listening to Bigger Pockets and shows like yours, and it was the podcast that really got me going. And it took a year of kind of learning and thinking and starting to work with a residential agent, partnered with family who had some savings in excess of what they wanted to keep in the stock market, and they were interested in diversifying. So it was a good match where I would do all the work, they would put in capital. And we bought a single family house together that I did soup to nuts. I was the manager, the leasing agent, the maintenance guy, and I was everything. And I think that's a good way to start, where you get some hands-on, dirt under your fingernails and kind of see how these different processes work when you're doing it and how you want it done in the future, before you kind of grow and scale. And I did that. We had that for a year, and then we, did another one, and pretty soon I got a mixed use building right down the street from the college that I was then working at. And then kind of ran out of family money after another deal, and went out to some friends because I had found good deals. And I think if you work hard in your local community, you can find good deals. And that can be interesting, to a lot of people that want to get out of markets they can't control and do something real and physical. So kind of transitioned from just my own resources to family, then family and friends, and then friends of friends, investor list, onwards, and slowly grew, eventually my own management company. I got my broker's license. So I had a lot of different little chunks of income to kind of justify quitting a pretty good day job, raising money for college scholarships. And those were great skills, because what you learn in fundraising is that it's all about relationships, to get so-called major gifts. It's not what you know, it's who you know and how you interact with them. And building that confidence and trust is really key. And just being honest about what's going on with investors, whether they're donors or investors. I mean, they need to know about the downs and the ups, not just the ups. And I think that helps over time for them to, for you to become someone that people want to work with. And that's sort of how I've grown to where I am now, where we're managing about 350 units. We've got another 230 in the pipeline and hopefully more from there.
So how long ago did you get the real estate bug?
2016, I remember it well. It was like that pregnancy test, and I was like, um, I'd invested in the stock market. I was lucky that my, parents taught me about that at a young age. I'd done that for 10 or 15 years, and that's all well and good. You can turn, a couple thousand into 10 or 20, but you can't just retire on 10 or 20 grand in the stock market or whatever. So, and it's not in your control, and it could go down in a heartbeat, and you got no way to change that. Whereas the beauty of real estate, when you own an asset, I mean, it is in your control. You can increase value. You can add value in different ways, whether it's physical labor or different management or rents, expenses. You can pull those levers and gears to really make it perform differently.
Yeah, and I know that you've got kind of a different background, which we'll touch on, especially with the whole green background and everything else, because a lot of landlords are just trying to get away with as cheap of a materials and products as they can with the mindset that it's going to get destroyed anyways. And I feel like you're probably of a different mindset. I had a friend and mentor that used to say in the past, your biggest asset is not the rental property, it's the tenant. And if you take care of the tenant, they'll take care of your property. And I never forgot that. It is relationships with your tenants as well. But what led you, I guess let's keep going down the path. So you had a single family house and then you started to grow from there. What was the next step?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before I touch on the next step, I just completely agree with you about the way you treat your tenants. And we try not to even call them tenants if it's on the residential side. We call them residents, as just a subtle way of saying this is their home. I think of our property management business a lot like a shoe store. And we're the customer service agents, like getting down on our knees and helping you try on shoes and being a really service, polite, hardworking, quick to respond oriented business. Now, if you're a jerk and you treat us like crap, like we're going to say bye bye,
Mhm.
and it's not just a one-way street, the customer is always right kind of thing. But I think that service ethic, the tenants and residents are the ones paying your mortgage, paying your profits and rent. And if you neglect them, they will absolutely neglect you and your property, rest assured. So the next step for me was, I had found these two single family residential homes. They were okay deals, nothing special per se at the time. I mean, now they've more than doubled in value, and that's, dumb luck of COVID timing, et cetera. But the next one I found, I couldn't find a good residential single family deal, and I just kind of stumbled on one that was down the street, from Bowdoin College where I worked at the time, and it was a mixed use. And I was like, what's that? And he's like, well, there's this engineering firm down on the first floor, but they pay rent just like an apartment. And then there's two apartments up above and that I understood and was looking for. And I was like, huh. So like three tenants under one roof. That's kind of a little economy of scale. And my broker, God bless him, said, and you could do it as a triple net lease. And I was like, what's that? What's triple? Is it the three tenants? What's going on? And he was like, no, no, no. That just means that when this commercial tenant pays triple net, they're not only paying their monthly rent, they're not only paying their share of the utilities or their meter or whatever, they'll pay their share of your property taxes, of your insurance, of your fire alarm system, even of your property management costs sometimes. So I was like, no, whoa, like really? They'll do that? Like, whoa. And that was a big, aha moment for me where the light bulb went on. I was like, well, that's better. I mean, that's great. And it can be better. But it's all about risk and reward because triple net, you're usually a larger format, larger size unit or a whole building. And thus it's great while it's occupied, very low headache, great cash flows, etc. It sucks when it's vacant. I mean, then you're 100% vacant or a huge vacancy, and those are slow and hard to fill. Commercial vacancies are no bueno in this day and age. So, but it worked out very well for me. The engineering firm stayed for a few years as a great tenant. When they outgrew that space, I chopped it up into five separate individual offices that are all now like therapists, and they got a nice little common space, and it's more rent from the five of them that I used to get as one big space. And that's
Mhm.
a big lesson that I would pass on to those that may not already know it. And it's almost intuitive, but lots of little units usually add up to more collectively than one big unit. And you're trading complexity of the small things, for increased profit and gross rents, basically.
Definitely. And there's a lot of those boutique commercial properties, other friends of mine that have those. They're more management intense, but it's justified by the cash flow as far as what they've told me. And I would say the other thing about the commercial side of things is the eviction process completely different and better. I'm not going to say it's better everywhere, but in my opinion, it's better because it's not their residence. So they don't have the consumer protections. If they don't pay you, it's a business not paying a business.
Yep.
And I don't know if you've had to evict anybody out of any commercial space or not, but if you have,
Trying to think. We've never gotten to the point of eviction. I mean, we've certainly parted ways with commercial
Mhm.
tenants. But a lot of times, like the beauty of those, and every state, has different laws around tenant protections. But in Maine, if a commercial tenant wants to leave before the end of their lease, we usually get them to pay the whole amount. And they'll do that if they're a pretty good sized company. This is one of 20 or 50 locations. I mean, what do they care? Okay, fine, you get 6 extra months or whatever. Great. And then we can re-rent it while we're still collecting the old lease, and that is legal. That is not legal in Maine with a residential tenant. As soon as you release a residential, apartment, you have to stop collecting rent from someone who's left. And in most cases, you're not going to get your rent paid remotely by someone who's left, even if you're legally entitled to it in a residential scenario. Those are often like blood from a stone kind of situations.
Yeah, and oftentimes, again, we're not giving legal advice, but oftentimes that triple net lease is signed by an officer of the company, but also signed with a personal guarantee. So they're on the hook twice.
That is great advice, Derek, and that's something that one could easily overlook with commercial leases is you want that personal guarantee, and that puts a lot more skin in the game for them to do right by that lease because they don't want their house and their car and their stuff getting messed with.
Yep, yep. So you had that mixed use building and then you kept growing from there. What was the next step?
Yeah, then I caught a tiger by the tail and put one of the bigger buildings in the town of Brunswick, Maine under contract that was this beautiful historic, brick and granite 4-story mansard roof, property in the corner of Main Street kind of thing under contract. And they only wanted $1 million for it. And I just knew in my gut and my bones that it was easily worth two or three. And so I just jumped on it, first person to be able to snag it and get it under contract. I spent the next 4 months getting a master's degree in, remodeling, construction, historic tax credits, how those are done with consultants and the National Park Service. And I basically spent about $40,000 all to figure out, gosh, like gutting and redoing this building and adding apartments to these vacant, derelict upper floor spaces is a really high risk, pretty low reward proposition that I'd spend the next 2 years needing everything to go right to get investors like a 12% return when I could just leave it, take a loss, lick my wounds, and go out and do other things in the next 2 years. And lo and behold, in the next 2 years, I did over 100 units. I took my losses on that one. I backed out the day before my earnest money went hard. It got put under contract 5 times after me, and each of them backed out. I mean, they found the same thing that a lot of times, historic renovations in buildings that need all new plumbing, electric, heating, all kinds of stuff, major construction can be as or more expensive as new construction, but you don't always have the economies of scale inside these old shells. So that was a really great learning experience, a networking experience. Like I wouldn't trade that horrible failure for anything. But
Mhm.
I backed out. And I think, and I said to my investors who were lined up, I mean, they were ready to put in money. I was like, I'd rather not risk losing your money than take you on a journey that I don't have a good grip of how this is really going to go. And it wasn't a good first project, for almost any, young investor. That's a really advanced kind of thing to figure out. And you want a lot of dry powder, which I did not have at that stage of
Mhm.
my career to justify those kind of risks.
Well, and what most people don't think about is, yes, you may have this old, beautiful historic building, but and my background before, full-time real estate investing, I was in commercial construction. I put in sprinklers for fire protection, and that is one that I saw personally when I was a sprinkler fitter, building owners that all of a sudden had to put in a very expensive fire protection system because codes changed. And we're the redheaded stepchild in the construction world because you're spending all this money for something you hope never has to operate. Because if it operates, you had a fire, right? But it's it's just that, and you got asbestos and lead and potential mold and all the different stuff. Um, and it's really hard to figure that out in a 60, 90, or even 120-day due diligence period. And a lot of people just say, well, like as you mentioned, it's so cheap. It's $1 million. How could I go wrong? Mm, yeah, it adds up really fast.
No, that's a great point, Derek. And I love that you worked in a sprinkler company, and that's a really like area that I'm super passionate about. That's like not sexy, like you said. It's an afterthought for most people, but fire sprinklers save lives so effectively in
Hmm.
buildings. And this recent tragedy that happened in Switzerland, the first thing I did is looked at those photos to see if there were sprinkler heads. And of course, there are not. And to
Hmm.
me, it should be wildly criminal that you can pack 300 people in an unsprinkled basement. I don't care what you put on the ceiling or what you do with exits. Like they would have been fine if
Hmm.
that had had a proper fire sprinkler system. And there's no money for it. To me, like this is something that state and federal government should take responsibility for. It's a public good. We should not have innocent renters dying in home fires, for these multifamily buildings that are 1 or 200 years old that aren't sprinkled when we could have a 0% revolving loan fund or something to make it worthwhile for landlords. Because me as a landlord, I'm not getting a dollar of extra rent from a tenant whether they have a little metal sprinkler over them or not. They don't care. I mean, they use it as a clothes hanger sometimes, and God help us if that goes off.
Oh
But
yes, and I
yeah.
can tell you some stories about those going off. But it's different by municipality. But a lot of places you'll get like a 5 to 10% insurance break if you have fire protection. But
Yep.
that doesn't, if you've got a $5,000 a year insurance policy and you save 5%, big deal. It costs you 100 grand to put that system in. But I agree. If there was, and maybe it's not government subsidized, but there would be some way at least of having tax advantages or something, because there are municipalities where if you're building new, yes, you have to put it in. But as you mentioned, these old buildings, they slip by on the radar, and I get it.
I almost bought a restaurant building in Maine that was a big building on a main street. It had 3 restaurants on the first floor, 11 apartments on the top floor, no sprinkler system. I'm like, you're cooking with fire in 3 places underneath people living there. And the craziest thing, Derek, is that the owner was like, oh, yeah, we had a fire once, and I was recovering from an injury in a wheelchair in one of the apartments. And I mean, I almost died. And I was like, and you didn't think that maybe you should put in a sprinkler system at that point. And I just underwrote it as part of my project. I was like, I'm not going to sleep at night knowing that I own this building in that condition. And a lot of times, if you can finance that up front, with the bank's capital, it can be a bullet that can be bitten. I'm not saying it's
Hmm.
great, but it can be bitten, and I think it can be the right thing to do, especially if you want to add extra units. You can do that legally with a sprinkler system. You can do a lot of things legally with a sprinkler system. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
preaching to the choir here, but for a lot of the listeners, they can make really cool things possible where you can suddenly be adding new units to spaces that code would not otherwise allow you to do that. And if you can do it with an upfront construction loan from the bank where you're only putting 10 or 20% down, I mean, that can actually be well worth it up front. But doing it out of cash flow, out of rents is almost always impossible.
Yeah, I'm going to tell one quick story, then we're going to segue. But I had a call, obviously, many years ago. Some kids were partying in a hotel in a college town, and they broke a sprinkler head off on the second floor of a two-story hotel. And so all the water, and this was at, of course, 1 in the morning. So fire alarms go off, hotel gets vacated. It's dead of winter in Wisconsin, so it's cold outside. That hotel had gypcrete floors, which is a concrete, but when it gets wet, it swells up. So the water went across the second floor, then went down through the ceilings into the first floor. They used their parents' credit card to book that hotel. Their parents were liable for all of the damage to that hotel. So here's the word of caution. Don't let your kids book a hotel room on your credit card and make dang sure that, if they're going to do something stupid, they have no assets to go after. So segueing from there, what other environmental upgrades would you do to a rental property that most people typically don't?
Yeah, that's a great question. To me, you want to start with the least sexy stuff. And that's where your highest ROI is going to be, which is almost always air sealing and insulation, where you can take a cheap thermal camera and look at your windows, and windows aren't well insulated except in the best of cases, and even so you can't get anywhere near what you can do in an attic or a wall cavity with a window. But a lot of times they got air coming in the sides of them that you just a simple bead of caulk can save you hundreds of dollars a year, which again, every dollar you save might be 20 of value, depending on your cap rate. If you're paying the heating bill, as a landlord, which in many buildings it's a central system, in a cold climate or a climate that needs AC. It's the same principle. If you're just
Right.
chucking your conditioned air out into nature with no heat exchange system, HRV, ERV system to recapture some of that, you're losing a lot of money. So looking at air sealing around windows, around pipes and things that penetrate ceilings, it's really cheap to do that, and it's a very high ROI. The next thing to look at is insulation. Again, if you're paying the heating bill or cooling bill of a building, if you don't have like at least R50 or 60 up in your attic, which is a couple feet, of cellulose insulation, you're losing a lot of money every year. You're probably paying 30% more than you need to. Rim joists of basement. There's so many basements I go into and you see daylight out of them. And
Hmm.
your furnace is putting out waste heat, that's getting out the window and no one cares because no one likes to go down into a basement. Like you can learn a lot about a building from its basement. That's the most important part of a lot of these buildings. See what's really going on down there. What systems are there? Are they rusting? So just simple insulation and air sealing. You do it once, and every year you're saving, double digit percentages on energy costs. It's a huge ROI. It's inert, it's passive, it'll last you decades, if not forever. It's such a great win-win to do. And I think many people overlook it entirely. So that's number one. And then number two, going a little bit higher up the food chain, but if you buy a multi-unit building in Maine and throughout the Northeast, there's a lot of oil burning systems that are both expensive and inefficient. And a lot of people are just of an ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. And I'm sometimes of that mentality too. But a lot of times they are kind of broke. And as soon as they need a repair, or often as soon as I see one, I'm like, oh, interesting. You're paying 12 grand a year, to heat these 4 units. Like, okay, I can spend 25 grand up front with my construction loan, and put in a heat pump for each of those 4 units, decommission the oil system. You don't have to rip it out. In fact, I'd leave everything in place. I mean, you got to drain the tank, but that can often be done for free by, auto company that'll reuse the oil or for heating or whatever. But now you've transitioned that 12 grand a year onto residents through like 100 extra bucks, $150 a month of electric bill, which is often not a deal breaker. Sometimes if they're in a fixed income, I'll phase it in or be, gentle, gradual about that. But a lot of times that's not a deal breaker. And they get an amenity that they didn't have because the heat pump will give you AC, it'll give you dehumidification, air filtering for people with allergies or asthma. They're a great device and they're very efficient at generating heat and cooling. So that can, increase your NOI dramatically. If you take 12 grand off of your expenses, you're adding over 100 of value to your building and you're not paying 100 to get, one heat pump per unit in there in that kind of size.
And that is typically tax deductible. Sometimes there's programs and grants, which I was going to mention when you were talking about sealing off windows. Go to your local city, municipality, wherever you are, and see what they have for block grant programs or landlord rental programs. I don't really use it a lot anymore, but there were grant programs when I first started in the 2003, 4, 5 era. Um, you could get grants to remove lead. You could get grants to put in new windows. And in the stipulations were typically you had to agree to rent to a certain, moderate income tenant, but that's the neighborhood it was in anyways. I had one, I sold a duplex in 2025 and I forgot about the grant. And it wasn't really a grant, it was a very low interest loan. So it had a 1% accruing interest rate since 2007. So we
Wow.
got the closing statement. I'm like, what is this payoff, to the city? And looked into it, I'm like, oh yeah, we had a grant to put all new windows in that property in 2007. And we didn't have to pay anything for it until $2,025. Think about that. What was that same dollar worth in 2007 versus what it's worth in 2025? I'd much rather pay him with $2025 than $2007. So, look into those programs. They are there to help. And if those municipalities don't give out that grant money, they don't get allocated as much the next year. So they're typically very good to work with.
That is great advice. Everyone listening, like rewind and listen to what Derek just said again. Because a lot of times there's free money from the government, whether it's local, state, or federal, whether it's tax credits, grants, low interest loan programs, and that is a very high ROI use of your time to investigate those. In the Northeast, there's a lot of that. Certainly in Maine, we have a state program that gives great incentives. Every heat pump we install, we're getting 500 to $1,000 back, basically. Water tanked heat pumps are even better. I mean, those are literally like 80% off at your hardware stores through these kind of programs because they're so efficient and they save so much energy and money that it really has been a win-win.
Yeah. And there is city level, county level, and state level. So look into all of them.
For sure.
Is there any other environmental stuff? And I guess the next thing I would ask is, do you also try and update units so they have your more modern, plugs for chargers and amenities? So it's not really environmental, it's more amenity based.
Yeah, that's a great question. We haven't done a ton of the combined outlets with like USB and USB-C and that kind of stuff. It's kind of cool. You're seeing it in hotels now. I'm a, you can't really future-proof that. Like the USB is already really obsolete. I mean, there's nobody's making new of the kind of wide fat ones that are out there a lot. And I'm sure, 10, 20 years USB-C may be looked at and laughed and we're just doing everything wirelessly by then or who knows.
Mhm.
But so I've been kind of traditional with outlets, but we have a lot of them. We want a lot of good outlets in new construction, for people to make any room an office or that kind of thing. We were doing some interesting stuff with solar. There was a grant program where you could get half of that paid for in rural commercial properties. That's no longer available. What is interesting is that the 30% tax credit for solar has phased out for residential. It is still alive for commercial for like another 2 years. So
Hmm.
that is something, for folks to definitely be aware of. But to me, solar is kind of like the top of the pyramid in terms of it's almost like a bond. It's not a fast, quick, great ROI. It's kind of a okay, steady ROI, and it's great when it works. If you have capital to deploy to do that. I mean, electric prices have been up over 4% nationwide in the last year. Maine is one of the worst. I mean, we're paying like 23 to 25 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity here, which is insane. Um, in retrospect, I wish we hadn't started decommissioning and not building new nuclear fleets, and that's a whole other conversation because it's climate neutral and great baseload power. But I do think that there are wise things you can do that are inert, passive, not super costly. Windows is a tricky one where if it's an old wood framed single pane window, we will generally replace those more because they often have lead paint in them and it's a health
Mhm.
hazard than even the energy piece of it. But we don't generally pay a lot of premium for windows that have, a 12 R value versus the cheaper standard one that might have a 4, or
Right.
something like that. Because in reality, those are both terrible R values and you're going to lose heat through that. But the key is that the air doesn't pass through or around the window, and the heat's going to
Mhm.
rise. So as long as your cap is well insulated in the attic or the spaces above, that's, I think, more important.
Yeah. Well, you started a property management company. I was going to ask if you lost a bet or what led you to want to start your own property management company. But before you answer that, a lot of us, especially in smaller rural areas or not as densely populated areas, there aren't good management companies or very few management companies. So what led you to want to start yours?
Oh, just masochism. I love pain. Um, no, I was unsatisfied with the way that our managers were filling vacancies, the way or not filling them as the case was, the way they were not keeping the books clean, and giving me a good accounting of what was going on, not passing on the proceeds timely way or accurately. So I was just like, I'm over that. I need to do this myself and start my own company. But why do I like it? Why do I enjoy it? It's really like two reasons. I love the team building aspect to just growing a company and a business. And I love seeing people that we bring on that were dissatisfied with their old jobs just really blossom and thrive, with us in an environment where they're treated like adults.
Mhm.
And we have challenges that are hard sometimes. And property management, I mean, my phone was blowing up during this podcast with a cranky tenant, and that happens sometimes where things get kicked up. But the reason I love it too is because you can do so much good for your residents. And I say this with the straightest of faces. I feel like I have saved more lives and done better things as a for-profit landlord than I ever did in my 9 years in the nonprofit sector, where I was raising money for kids that lived in a garbage dump and I was raising
Mhm.
money for scholarships for college students that are low income. You can tangibly do the right thing here. I mean, we've had residents that, get cancer and can't make a rent payment. Well, if you're their landlord, you can do the right thing and let it ride and say, hey, I know you'll be good for it in the next year. Let's make a payment plan. Let's help you get through this. You're not just getting a 30-day notice the day you find out you have cancer and have to make other payments. Like, you can do really great things to help people, whether they're new immigrants, come into this community with nothing, helping them get a fresh start, in a place that a lot of landlords, oh, no credit, no job history, like, no way. And I don't
Mhm.
look at it that simply. I think you want to be careful because you can get burned no matter whether your resident's family has been here since the Mayflower or whether they arrived, yesterday. I think you got to be prudent and careful. But the stories of seeing like kids thrive, that were living in a car with their parents before they came to us, stuff like that is just really heartwarming that you can't do if you're just in third party management. You're not gonna get those opportunities and those stories. Not that that's wrong in all cases, but that's what I love about it.
Well, and the part about that is nobody talks about the good tenants because they're boring. But there is a much higher percentage of good tenants versus bad tenants. And as you said, when you treat them properly and you treat them as residents and not tenants, not everybody is going to reciprocate, but the vast majority of them are going to reciprocate. I had tenants years ago that, sent me Christmas cards for a long time after they were no longer my tenant,
Wow.
and or send me, referrals to other houses that were for sale or other things because I took care of them. Now today I don't have a lot of straight tenants. I prefer to put people in on rent to own contracts,
Mm,
but in general, they're still residents, and you treat them. What's the old Patrick Swayze saying from Roadhouse? You be nice until it's time to not be nice. And if you live by that, but by the same token, we're not running a charity, and we all have families to feed too.
yeah. Yeah, I agree. I got my limits. We don't like to let people start getting late or 30 plus days, overdue payments. I mean, we are very proactive about that. And you can either make a plan to get folks back on track, or you need to make an exit strategy to part ways because, like you said. But it's interesting. I mean, our state has a eviction protection program where you, the landlord, can sign some paperwork and get like back rent owed paid through this program. And I'm
Hmm.
sure we're not the only state that has something like that. So that can be a huge win-win. I had a resident once that had their boss at their job pay back rent because they had had an addiction problem. They got clean, but there was a couple months of rent that they couldn't pay up. And I was getting ready to say, hey, this is too much. Like we got to part ways. And the boss was like, this guy's a great worker. How much does he owe? Where's your bank? All right, there you go. And it was incredible.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dave, my regulars know what question is coming next. What's one question I should have asked you that I didn't? And it can be about anything.
Oh, maybe like what was my biggest failure or where did I lose the most money? Try to take me down a peg so that we can learn from my embarrassing mistakes.
Well, they've learned plenty from my embarrassing mistakes, so we might as well, tip the scales your way a little bit.
Oh yeah. No, I almost had one recently. I mean, I was 50 grand into a construction deal that I almost had to back out of. And luckily we were able to proceed, but those are tough. And I lost a bunch of money in due diligence, 4 months spent on a historic property, lost $40,000 in 4 months of time, but it's almost like I gained a master's degree in what not to do.
Mhm.
So, think of them as schooling when you lose money in real estate. You're getting education of how to avoid pitfalls.
Education is never free. You pay for it on the front end or you pay for it on the back end, but it's never free. That's for sure. Well,
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you, coming on the show and kind of talking through. Is there anything, how can people, follow you or get in touch with you, and anything we can do to serve you, by all means.
Yeah, thanks a lot. No, I'd be happy to connect, on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me by email. It's dave@holmanhomes.com. That's my website too, with a contact form, which is Holman Homes. And I love learning about, what you're doing in real estate and share notes and, see how we can do anything together.
Perfect. Well, that's a great wrap up, Dave. I appreciate it again. To everyone else that's here every week, thanks for coming back. Those of you who are just finding us, well, number one, thanks for finding us. Number two, come back again. But anything that you can do to help spread our message. I say it on every show. The generations of wealth. It's not just about money. It's about living your vision and loving your life and doing good things. So, till the next one. Thanks again to Dave. Go out there, have some fun, do some deals, and we'll see you next time.